First Nations people should be aware that this digital story may contain the images and names of people who have passed away. I live in a country which is the home of the longest surviving culture in the world, First Nations peoples. It is made up of many different First Nations cultures, so I would like to do an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the area in which I live. I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and the Jagera peoples who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and learn. I recognise their ongoing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to First Nations peoples, their elders past, present and emerging. In the region that is now identified as Brisbane, the Yugara language was and is spoken by the Turrbal and Jagera people. I currently reside in central Brisbane, but I was primarily raised in the Wynnum area. My father was born in Sri Lanka, and whilst my mother was born here, her parents were Sri Lankan too. Sri Lanka is a third world country off the coast of India that is characterised by poverty and is continuing to recover from a civil war. My family came to this country for freedom and opportunities, and whilst it was an opportunity for them, there was as much oppression occurring here for the First Nations as there is in Sri Lanka. I recall going to school and learning about the Eureka Stockade, colonisation in Britain. I cannot recall learning about First Nations. It was only through university, my work as a child safety officer, youth worker and now placement worker that I'm starting to form an understanding of the impacts of colonisation and the society in which we live for First Nations. My work colleagues and clients have been my biggest resource. It is sad to think that the only reason I am more informed is because of this. It makes me wonder about those that haven't had these experiences. How informed are they, particularly if they live in an invisible First Nations area as I? When I look out on my balcony, what do I see? I see trees amongst the large buildings and houses. I see the Tab, a pub, a bottle shop, cafes and McDonald's. I go for a stroll into Fortitude Valley, passing through Breakfast Creek in Newstead. I only saw more buildings, non-First Nations cultural artwork. I saw Chinatown, other cultural cuisines and nightclubs. I was unable to see anything that related to First Nations peoples aside from a couple of street names. When I walked through South Bank, I saw two signs, an image on the sides of the State Library, as well as the souvenir shop attached which incorporated items relating to First Nations. Something that stood out to me was the Brisbane plaque that appeared to be admiring the city's colonisation. I only saw a handful of things relating to First Nations culture. Given the diversity of their culture and their right to their land, should there not be more? Some of the things that were there felt more tokenistic than it did an incorporation and an acknowledgement of First Nations cultures. One thing I love about Australia is the multiculturalism of our country. One thing I despise is the lack of traditional owners' cultures in our society. It appears we have moved faster and further from the white policy days than we have from colonisation. We are more welcoming of others than we are of the people that maintained and loved this land. When the first settlers arrived, they erected monuments, buildings, and created their society as a demonstration of victory. There was a possessiveness about the colonisers to shun anything that related to First Nations, their language, culture, identity. It was evident that to some extent this was still occurring. I did not expect this as I thought we had moved further than this. It was disappointing to see the lack of visibility, acknowledgement, culture, language, and identity of First Nations. It is clear that what the colonisers and our westernised society did not count on was the strength and fight of First Nations peoples and all their supporters. This fight will continue until it need not anymore.